Hello, beautiful friends. I'm Sherilyn, the Happy Stylist, and today I have the guest that I promised you, the fantasy football expert. We're in awe. My husband Chris has maybe regretfully, no, decided to come on my show after I invited him and said, you must come on my show because you know so much about fantasy football and you must share with the world, whoever watches this, about fantasy football and how he does it and just the ins and outs of it, although it's kind of your secrets, right?
They won't be secrets after today.
I know. But think of all the happy people that you'll be making happy in fantasy football world that don't know anything like me and is learning the game. So, yeah.
Actually, I think my secrets are safe because this is a beauty channel, right? So
Yeah.
nobody's going to really be tapping into
It's a beauty channel, but
fantasy
hopefully,
football secrets of mine, but I will
hopefully the
share
people that are
these
watching,
with the ladies out there and see how well y'all do this
well,
year.
if they like your tips, they may just share with their significant others or their husbands and say, you got to watch this guy, Chris. He knows what he's talking about. And then they're like, I'm not watching some beauty channel. They say, no, it's Fashion Meets Football. And the Happy Stylist brought her husband on, who is a fantasy football guru. So, all right. So, welcome to the show.
Overselling me just a little bit. The
God,
pressure's
oversell.
on.
No
Okay.
pressure.
All right.
Okay,
So
what's
fire
the,
away. What's
the
first
one
question?
thing that I hate when we watch those the sports shows at ESPN where they all talk on top of each other, right? And I'm doing just that. Sorry.
How
Okay.
do you feel about that last play? Yeah, it's the same
I
question.
feel amazing.
When-
Okay, so we have to let them
That's
know.
the question you hate on the on-field interviews.
Yes. Okay, my husband and I have this thing that we don't like, sorry, but at the end of the game, there's always it could be a guy, it could be a girl, and they ask, "Hey coach, how did you feel on that last play when your guy scored the touchdown?" And he says,
I feel great, man. It was just an awesome feeling winning the game or whatever, it's just always the same question though.
"How do you think he felt?" That's why we say it's kind of a generic question.
The question.
And what are they going to say? Oh, I felt terrible. We won it. We won the Super Bowl. I felt, oh my gosh, when he ran across, I was like, oh no. So that's why we say we need to come up with better questions.
That's right.
But anyway, okay, so to start the show off, I want to talk about general strategy. How do you position yourself to win going into fantasy football for the draft in the whole season?
It starts with the draft, so that's key. You've got to draft well. In our leagues, as you know, we do live drafts. It's not automatic, so you have to do your homework before you draft and have a strategy going in. If you just are just sort of shooting from the hip, you're at a disadvantage. So with that said, things change during the off season, so you have to always be aware of all the coaching changes and player changes because teams sign free agents and coaches change from one team to the other, and players move up in their experience, and
Some retire out, like Andrew Luck.
Some are getting old and over the hill, and younger players that are maybe have 2 years experience are going into their third year, and that can be a breakout year. So you have to look at all that and do a little homework before the draft, but it starts with the draft, and before the draft, it's the homework. And what type of homework do? I get online and do my searches and just study which players are where and which ones have the most potential to break out. So that's sort of keeping it simple. Now, the draft, when I go into a draft, a lot of it depends on we're an ESPN league, which auto assigns your draft position, so it really depends sometimes on where you line up on the draft. I do not like drafting first or 10th. We've got a 10-team league.
Which what I was on one of my drafts.
Yeah, and so those to me are bad positions to draft out of, and because we have a snake draft, which means if you draft first, then you're drafting 20th on your next pick, and too many good players go off the board. But I prefer either like the 4 slot or the 7 slot for drafting.
But ESPN, you can't pick it, right? It just is assigned to you.
It's assigned to me. So it's assigned to us. So on the draft, my strategy is sort of threefold. It's to draft for value. So if I find players that are moving off the board higher than they should, I stay away from those. But if I find players that are coming off the board late and I know enough about them and they present value, that's the way I'm going to draft. That's my strategy. I open up with trying to draft a running back, there's probably 4 in the league that will always outperform the rest of the running backs. And so I'm trying to draft an upper echelon running back right off the bat. But if, let's say, I'm drafting 7th and they're all gone, the 4 or 5 that are above the other running backs, they're off the board, then I'm going to I usually try to draft a wide receiver that's an upper echelon wide receiver that can give you an advantage. So my strategy is always to have like 3 players on my team that will always give me an advantage over the field. That can be the quarterback, the tight end, wide receiver, or running back, but you have a, blue chip type of player that whenever you're lining up, you have an advantage over the other team, because it's all about matchups with the teams you're playing, and you have to have some sort of an advantage over them. So, for example, this year I might try to draft Kelsey out of Kansas City as my tight end, because he typically has an advantage over Travis Kelsey over all the other tight ends when you're matching up. Quarterback could be Pat Mahomes. You've got 3 or 4 running backs that give you an advantage over the other running backs in the league. And,
well, let me ask you a question. So you can strategize all you want, but you got the position that's assigned to you in the snake draft, so that can nix a lot of the people you want to get.
Correct.
But I know you do your homework, so you have a wide panel of rankings of the different positions.
Well, once the upper echelon players, and they're going to go off the board pretty quick. Once they're gone, then I'm just trying to, based on my homework, draft the best value, and then that's the middle part of the draft. And then the tail end of the draft, I'm drafting sleepers and potential breakout players. It does me no good in my mind, to draft the number 2 or 3 receiver on the Packers, even though they have a passing offense, if I have let's say a 3rd-year player coming up that could be a breakout wide receiver 1 or running back 1, when I know for a fact these other players are going to be wide receiver 2s or wide receiver 3s. And when we say that, we mean on the team or on your fantasy football team, they're not going to really be competing with wide receiver 1 players. They're just sort of a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3.
Are they starting usually, or not necessarily?
Well, they're starting players, but they may not produce the points. I'm going to sort of gamble a bit in the middle and tail end of the draft to try to find breakouts. And then, the other thing that I do is, my strategy is to always work the pool after the draft. So, I'll look in the pool even right after the draft, but that you're really not going to find a whole lot in the pool right after the draft. But I'm scanning the pool every week after every game, because I'm going to churn the bottom 3rd of my fantasy football team. It might be the bottom 3 players that are on my bench. I'm going to always be working them in and out of the pool, or other players in order to try to find that breakout player, which gives you the advantage.
And also
there.
The importance of watching the news. ESPN will give you updates on players that are hurt or not starting this week, or something happened, and so if you have their backup, right, that's important to know who the backup is, which I know not. This is where his expertise comes in.
You need to know the players and on each team and the general philosophy. The other thing I try to do in drafts is draft players on offenses that generate a lot of offense or points. So it could be, the New Orleans Saints, for example, have a high-powered offense. Did I draft Drew Brees this year? No, because his age indicates he may go down with the next hit. Toward the tail end of the season, his shoulder was sort of wearing out. Did I draft Brady? No. Ben Roethlisberger? No, because they're older and I just don't want to take the chance. So I'm looking for up-and-coming players or breakout players in good offenses where the offensive philosophy would favor the type of player I'm taking. So Kansas City, for example, they have a great offense. So you're looking at their tight ends, their wide receivers, their running backs. Green Bay with Rodgers is going to pass and move the ball.
But shave the mustache off Rodgers.
Shave your mustache. Right.
That's a Happy Stylist fashion tip for Aaron Rodgers. Get rid of the mustache, bro. Make it look 10, 20 years younger.
That's it. And what Sherilyn's saying is you got to stay on top of the what's going on almost on a weekly basis. For example, the news broke just 2 days ago or whatever, that LaShawn McCoy got cut from the Buffalo Bills. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs picked him up, so that changes everything. But the Kansas City Chiefs, and you have to decide, do I want to go try to find LaShawn McCoy if he's in the pool, or do I want to drop one of my other chief running backs? I had Darwin Thompson. Now he's as a backup, and I thought he would overtake Damian Williams sometime during the seasons, but this changes everything on him. So it's always a fluid situation that you have to stay on top of. And if you're late getting a player out of the pool, I'd rather be early going to the pool on a weekly basis and have to drop that player a couple weeks later than be late. And here's a perfect example. Like last year, I was early on Nick Chubb. I had him on my bench, and I slid him into the pool 1 week, thinking we could get by another week. And
no one would see it.
No one would know.
No one would pick him up.
Nobody was paying attention to Nick Chubb. And then he had, when I put him in the pool that 1 week, I think he came in and played, or the other guy got traded off or whatever. So Sherilyn, my wife,
who knows
went
nothing,
in and grabbed Nick Chubb based on a little tip from one of her friends.
I
And
told you,
Dustin,
gotta
if you're
have it.
watching, and you might have
It
told
wasn't
her, I don't
him.
know who
It wasn't
was,
Dustin.
but
Although Dustin, you've helped me in the past.
stole my player.
See, so for a girl, if you're just coming on and you're like, hey, I want to try to learn fantasy football, my secret weapon is you have to make friends with, it can be girls or guys at your office that know more than you do. So you can say, hey, what's your advice? And so it was Caleb, C3, that gave me the advice about Nick Chubb, because he's like my husband. He knows everything about every player. He's done his homework. He knows who's hurt, who's his backup player, who he played with in high school, and who's on the team with him this year. And anyway, there's a lot to know. But you can still do it. See?
So another key that'll help you is you look for players that other people are overlooking.
They call them
So
sleepers?
Well, not really sleepers, but let's just say
Sneakers?
really sneak. But let's say I'll use Tampa Bay for example. And
That's where I'm from. Tampa
anyway,
Bay!
Tampa Bay, everybody's rating their tight end and wide receivers. You know, Chris Godwin's supposed to be a breakout wide
I have him on one of my
receiver.
teams.
O.J. Howard, a breakout tight
I have
end, and
him.
you've got Mike Evans, who's a seasoned veteran wide receiver who always produces. And yet, you know, they don't. The quarterbacks in the pool after the draft. Well, you got to work backwards. If all those offensive players are going to produce, the quarterbacks got to produce too. I mean, you can't have all these receivers and tight ends producing big numbers without the quarterback producing as well. So you look for situations like that. You can work backwards like that or forward. I'm always looking when I'm drafting wide receivers, for example, what's the quarterback situation? If the quarterback stinks, doesn't matter how talented your wide receiver is or what he did last year. If you have a quarterback issue, that affects the wide receiver and vice versa. Running backs, I'm always looking at how good the offensive line is and maybe their schedule. If they're playing a whole schedule of tough run defenses, it's going to affect your running back, especially if he doesn't have a good run blocking offensive line. Tight ends, you just look at the offensive philosophy. You can sort of go by what they did last year. That's more consistent.
I have a question for you too.
Defenses. Let me finish defenses and quarterback, and then you ask the defenses. Here's one that a lot of people just pick the top fantasy defense from last year, whatever, and that sometimes
Doesn't
work.
matter,
I mean, the
right?
Bears should do well again this year, but the schedules change. The strength of schedule changes based on how that team finished. What I do on a defense is I'm looking at the schedule first. I'm looking at, based on their schedule, if they're playing weak offensive lines, that's key because you need, on your fantasy defense anyway, with me, I'm drafting a fantasy defense that has at least 2 good quality pass rushers, and then I'm looking at the schedule and I'm looking at weak pass blocking offensive lines, and you can do that by just Googling the search there.
Thank God for
And
Google.
then I'm looking at poor quarterbacks, below average quarterbacks against
Better.
good pass rushing defenses. Weak offensive lines is going to produce points because most of the points are coming on sacks, interceptions, and fumbles. Also play into it, but it's too hard to predict that sort of thing, but you can predict sacks. So you're looking for defensive lines that have a couple good pass rushers or a good pass rushing linebacker and a good pass rushing defensive lineman, and then you look at their schedule. For example, I'll take the Broncos. Aren't rated high, but they've got 2 They've got Bradley Chubb and what's his name? I'm drawing a
Don't
blank.
know.
But
Don't ask me.
but they've got a
I'm
couple
learning
guys
anything.
that can rush the passer, and so you look at their schedule. They've got some weak opponents that don't have great offensive lines, and so they're going to produce some points.
What about playing at home or away? Does that affect anything?
Yeah, it affects a little bit. Your defense plays better at home, but everybody's got to split 8 road games, 8 home games. So
Yeah.
your offense plays into your fantasy defense, because if you have a terrible offense, let's just take the Broncos. Their offense is probably average at best, or maybe below average. Then their defense is going to be on the field a lot, and you're going to have more yardage racked up and possibly more points racked up against their defense. So you have to look at all that. But that's what I look at on defenses. On running backs, we went over that. Quarterbacks, I'm just looking at who their wide receivers are and the schedule. If they have a weak schedule on pass defense and they've got some good wide receivers, and the quarterback's decent, he's got to have some playmakers though. So,
Well, we have more questions, but we're gonna wrap up this show because it'll be too long for you to sit there and watch. So we're going to continue and do a couple series with Chris answering questions, because I have a couple more. But before I finish, I just wanted to ask you one question about, you might have kind of covered this, and maybe I just want to clarify it. On the quarterbacks, if you have a quarterback that's really good but doesn't have good support, like maybe he's lost
if he's
his
got a
familiarity
poor offensive line, or not, or his
Or lots of
receivers
people
got
that he's
signed
used
off
to
by
playing.
other
Yep.
teams
Yep.
or whatever, then you
Does that
can't just go by the name,
But he
That'd
could
be
have a
cool.
new combination, and he could be stellar, right? I mean, it could be a really,
Well,
it could work out really good for him, even though it's
Here's
not
a
what he's
key:
used
wide
to.
receivers in the NFL don't really flourish until about their 3rd year. So if he's got
And
young
maybe-
wide receivers, no, that's going to affect him. And one more tip
Sure.
in closing: the running back. Grab a running back that can not only run the ball and has a good offensive line, but can catch the ball out of the backfield. You do not want a 2-down, what we call a 2-down running back. I want a running back that can work into the offense. If they're playing a tough run defense, they can at least pass the ball to the running back out in the flat. And so that's key.
The flatlands, not the mountains.
Not the mountains,
Okay.
the flat. So
Make sure he plays well in the flatlands.
it's a
and not in the
3-down
mountains.
running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield. So
Hey,
yeah.
thanks for coming today, and we're going to continue with another show, so we'll put them up week by week. I'm not going to give you a Fabumazing tip today because you're Fabumazing already, so. So, thank you for tuning in. Remember, our motto is learn, laugh, live younger, and be the best you that you can be. And remember that you're gorgeous. And all you
That's
fantasy
right.
football players, hopefully you'll get your husbands to watch and say, hey,
Yep.
now you can watch a Happy Stylists because she's got her husband on there and he knows what he's talking about. So thanks for joining us, and have a happy day. And tune in for next week because
That's
we're
right.
going to ask him more questions. So you'll be a better
Wish
player.
everyone the best this year.
Have a happy day.